making life work for others. That's a very noble thought, not often embraced by as many people as perhaps should. I think about that often, and being here today, sitting this morning, trying to decide what would be my opening words, what would I say to all of you that would help me fully understand why I chose to say yes today. And I'm taken back to a couple of years ago. I was on 46th Street in New York City. I had been invited to address a gathering of entrepreneurs and innovators from around the world at the United Nations. But having grown up in the Mississippi Delta during the era of legal segregation, the United Nations, New York City, 46th Street, none of those places were on my agenda. But someone else made the difference in my life. And that is the opportunity that every human being has. We can make the difference in the life of another person. I would often find myself seated on the front porch, the steps that led up to the house, and I would look as far as I could, and all I could see were cotton fields. They were everywhere. You couldn't turn left, right without cotton fields and rows that never ended. But all of a sudden, my grandpa would come out of the front door, the screen door, and he would be dressed in his black suit and his hat. And Papa would say, "Anybody want to go to Greenville?" Now, Greenville, according to a writer, Paul Galloway, for young Cliff Taulbert, was tantamount to taking the Concorde to Paris, France. But it was only 26 miles away. But we rarely could get there. So Papa said, "Who wants to go to Greenville?" And I said, "I do, Papa." But I don't remember the asking as much as I remember the opening of the screen door. Because that is what my great-grandpa did. A simple act, a simple question, and I realized that I didn't have to see the same thing for the rest of my life. So I found myself some 7 years later in New York City, walking through the areas there the world had gathered, and I was intimidated because that was a place I had never envisioned. It was not on my bucket list. It was nowhere on a list near me that I would ever be there. So I walked into the assembly hall and the world, and I'm thinking to myself, what will I do? And when you're an adult male and you have a nice suit and a nice white shirt and a nice tie, you want to kind of pretend that you're not scared and that you know exactly what to do. Well, I didn't know what to do. So there was a young lady standing by, and I just simply said, "Ma'am, my name is Clifton Taulbert, and I will be speaking here tonight, but I'm not quite sure what to do next." So she just pivoted. She didn't even answer me, and she turned around, and she pointed to where the world was sitting. And there in a little lighted box was my name on the front row, Taulbert. And I started to cry. You know, crying is not a bad thing. It's a very vulnerable gift we have because it helps us to realize who we are not, and it also helps us to realize who others are. I remembered sitting on my grandpa's front steps, and now I'm standing in the assembly hall of the United Nations. It was a day I will always remember. And the day remembered is because other people matter. When I count to 3, I want everybody to say, by looking at another person, and simply say, "You matter." 1, 2, 3. Let's say that again. 1, 2, 3. You see, when we say "you matter" and actually mean it, we open ourselves up for opportunity to open the screen door, to do things that perhaps we would not have done. So today I want to thank you for the opportunity to let me speak before you. I'm in search of RAY. RAY is an acronym for respect, affirmation, and inclusion. And those are the types of things that, when lived out, will define our character. So what is character and what is ethical behavior? What are those two? I honestly believe that these are the gifts that we can give each other. Our good character is not just for us, but it's for the other person, the people that we run across, the people that we work with. That's what it's for. Ethical behavior is not just for us, but it is how we feel about others and how we interact with them and what we expect of them and what they expect of us and how we plan to live our lives in such a way that it makes a tremendous difference. Our workplaces, the workplace culture, where we spend most of our waking time is at work. It's such an important place to think about. What can I do in order to make a difference in another person's life? What can I do? What can I say? How can I live my life in order to make a tremendous difference? Well, character matters because character becomes the activity of our lives. It's what we do. It is not something that is strange, excuse me, that we've never seen before. It's what we do. It's our speaking. It's our talking. It's the conversations that we hold. It's how we work with a fellow employee. All of these things began to define who we are, our character. And character truly does matter. The name Sandy McDonald probably means nothing to you, but because of this man, I had the opportunity to serve on a board in Washington, D.C. called character.org for over 20 years. Sandy McDonald was the CEO and president of McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. And he's been deceased now for a number of years, almost 100 years old when he passed away. And I had an opportunity to know this man. This is the man who walked through McDonnell Douglas Aircraft and made a very executive decision. My people will do better if everybody is doing better. Not just the work, but how they treat each other, how they respond to each other. And when I first heard him say that, I said to myself, maybe this is true. Maybe he did do that because now he's retired. And, you know, we have good memory of things. And sometimes we have selective memory, you know, of how good we were at a particular time and the type of lessons that we left in our company as an executive, the things that we did. Now, I had an opportunity to go to a dinner in St. Louis. It really wasn't a dinner. It was an outside party. And there was an older black gentleman there, probably around 87 years old, 89, very well alive, alert and everything. And he had retired from a place called McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. So I decided that I would ask him. I said, do you know Sandy McDonald? And it was just like opening up the floodgates. Do I know Sandy McDonald? Oh, let me tell you. Now that was some man. He knew every name. He spoke to everybody. It didn't matter that I had come from Arkansas, no education. I had a job. I was important to him. I would never forget. He'd come by, shake your hand. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the character of an executive that was so pervasively positive that some 60 years later, there are people at a barbecue party in St. Louis, Missouri, talking about this man. But it was this man, Sandy McDonald, that realized that character and ethics are so important in the world of business that he created this organization to start with young men and women, young kids, helping us all to understand what's important and what is expected of us. My first point is our presence send signals. Have you ever thought about that? That's how important each of us are. Our presence send signals. Now let's think about that. People still look up. Now the question that I want to ask, what do you want them to see? People look up at home, moms and dads. My son looks up. I know because he called me from LA a couple of years ago. He said, Dad, am I going to have an inheritance? I'm serious. That's exactly what he said. Am I going to have an inheritance? I said, why are you asking this? He said, well, you and Mom gives away everything. It's not going to be anything left for me. He was looking up. And he got the picture of what I wanted him to see, that other people matter. It's not just about us. But people are looking up in the workplace. Your peers are looking up. They may not just come and stand in front of you and just sort of glance and just look up, but they are intuitively and internally looking up. So the question that I'm asking each of you, what do you want them to see? Because that's a very important question. Because your actions, how you respond, will make all the difference in what they see and how they understand this role of ethics and character, what it can mean in the world of work and business. Character is important, also ethics. But character is that overarching umbrella that covers just about everything. And I have learned over the years, no matter where I am, that character truly matters. And it's important that it starts with the young. And this is what Sandy McDonald was so committed to for all of his life, and gave me an opportunity to not only work with people in this country, but around the world. I had the opportunity to sit on the same platform with a great Chinese philosopher and democratic thinker, Martin Lee, simply because of an international conference on how do we build a better world. When do we start building that better world? You don't start when you're 35. You don't start when you're 40. You start building that better world when you're 6 years old, when you're 5 years old, when you're 7 years old. And we become the responsible agents for helping our young people to understand how this better world should look. Being our better selves, that to me is the goal of our humanity. That's the goal. How do we become our better selves? The second point is personal governance. Now, most of us have heard about corporate governance because when you go to a trustee meeting or a board meeting, that comes up. How are we doing? What's the nature of the company? But I can assure you that I don't care how tall the building is. I don't care how much marble is in the building. I don't care how many great paintings you have in the building. I don't care. The people are the governance. So personal governance is key to corporate governance. Corporate governance does not exist as something by itself. But each one of us, wherever we work, whoever we are, whatever we do, we are the governance that we're looking for. Our ability to make decisions about ourselves. Our decision to do the right thing because it's the right thing for us. Our decision to think in terms of how do I have a personal mission for my life? What are the goals and objectives that I have set? How will I respond to this company? As we ask and answer those questions, we begin to bring into focus the corporate governance, because we are the governance that we're looking for. Moral principles that govern a personal behavior. Our actions are our decisions. Our actions. And we have the choice over those. The third point is part of my story, a culture of exclusion. Let me read something to you. It's from the book, The Invitation. I had just come back from Scotland, and I was asked to come to a small town called Allendale, South Carolina, to speak, and I agreed to do that. And while there, I met an older Caucasian lady, probably near in her 90s, or 100 perhaps, and I had assumed her to be a retired school teacher. But she wasn't a retired school teacher. I would learn 6 months later when we were going back to South Carolina to have supper, as she called it, at her house. And I simply said to the guests, the educators from Boston University, I said, guys, where are we going for dinner, for lunch, for supper? They said, oh, we're going to Miss Camille's house. I said, oh, that's the retired school teacher. They said, no, she's not a retired school teacher. I said, well, who is she? They said, you don't know? I said, no. Miss Camille Cunningham Sharp was a descendant of one of the large slave-holding plantations in South Carolina. And at her age, she was actually growing thousands of acres of cotton and running the plantation as if time had never stopped. And I was invited to her house for supper. I was a little bit apprehensive because I knew that I would be the only African American there. And I said to myself, Clifton, what are you going to do when the butler opens the door? What are you going to do when all the people serving you will look like you? How are you going to handle all of this? These are the things that lived in my mind. So let me read a little bit to you, and then I'll get back to that. Yes, the music was there. In this eternal place where I would grow up, loving the people who loved me, and loving the food we shared and the good memories we made together. At the same time and in the same place, I grew up dreaming of a better place, simply because how I had to live. Whenever I stepped outside of the house that was ours, I was not one of them, the landed gentry who set in motion a way of life for those who look like me, a way of living that evolved out of slavery and dared the emancipation to change it. During my childhood years, legal segregation was my world, hence the required lessons of survival, lessons that many might assume would have fallen on the wayside as the decades passed and progressive education and monumental social legislation came into our lives. However, for me and so many other African American baby boomers, this would not be the case. Despite all that moved us forward, those powerful and defining lessons have had such a tenacious hold that they continue to surface. This reality was not lost on me during my life. After leaving the Delta, lessons I had been taught and experienced I had as a child continue to impact my thinking, and even today keep me second-guessing the world of them that surround me. And that day, I was concerned about the world of them that surrounded me. In this incredible plantation home, surrounded by thousands of acres of cotton, we knocked on the door, and this very small lady opened the door, not a butler. 5'4" perhaps, Mrs. Camille Cunningham Sharp. She came to the door, she grabbed my arm. She said, Mr. Taulbert, we have been waiting for you. And we walked into this place where I said under my breath, everything that had not gotten burned during Sherman's march throughout the South was relocated at her house. It was just remarkable. The chandeliers were bigger than any that I'd ever seen. The tables would seem like 30 people at one table. And there we were together, and our paths would cross for 5 years. 5 years our paths would cross. And that is what character is about. The 5 years of our paths crossing gave me an opportunity to observe the possibilities of just how impactful our presence is on others. Without ever knowing me, over the 5 years, Mrs. Camille unraveled every negative situation that I had found myself involved in as a child. And when she died in 2006, her daughter called me and simply said, Clifton, Mama is dead. And that was it. And I told my wife, I said, Barbara, I will write the story of Camille Cunningham Sharp. I will write the story of Clifton Taulbert, the great-grandson of slaves, walking with the great-granddaughter of slave owners. And the 5 years that we had an opportunity to travel a world that most people do not travel, to ask questions that most people do not ask, to learn what most people have not learned, that this world has place for all of us. And character is an incredible part of that. How we live our lives makes a tremendous difference in the world in which we live. This was my world, a culture of exclusion, the Mississippi Delta. But this world was made real for me, not by the exclusion that was there, but by the character of the people who decided to take my life on as their charge and their responsibility. I was looking for community, in search of that incredible, not place, but that sense of being. I wanted that. Every person tends to want that, but it is something that comes from someone else as well. So we are so interlinked. We are so important. And if you remember the movie where Tom Hanks played the guy that was on the island by himself, can't think of the name of it right now, but he was so mystified and distraught over not having a human being to talk with. He was by himself, so he got a coconut head, and I believe painted a face on it, so we would have someone to talk to. So the world was not, humankind was not designed to be alone. We were designed to live our lives in the presence of others. At the end of the day, we all matter. Our character matters. This is my great aunt. I'm looking for character. I'm looking for something. She's the lady who made the determination that no matter what happened in the Mississippi Delta, that I would get an education. I mean, it was her character, her commitment to that commitment. Her commitment to the commitment that I would get an education. I lived with that all of my life. We had to travel 100 miles round trip to school every single day in high school, passing 2 schools on the way. I never missed a day out of school. I graduated valedictorian of my class. I'm a member of Phi Beta Kappa today. I have taught as a guest professor at Harvard for 5 years, the Air Force Academy, and most of the major universities throughout Australia. Not because I was so good, but because of the impact of one person. Your impact, your presence, the impact of one person making a decision that maybe will not impact their lives, but it will impact the lives of others. This was my Uncle Cleve. This is the man that helped me to understand that even though the world had not necessarily set a place at the table of business and economic wherewithal, that it could happen. I wrote a book for the Kauffman Foundation. I don't know if many of you know about the Kauffman Foundation out of Kansas. And the book is called Who Owns the Ice House? It has been translated into several languages around the world. It's the story of my uncle, who owned the only ice house in Glen Allen, Mississippi. If you were black, you had to go there. If you were white, you had to go there. If you were Jewish, you had to go there. If you were Chinese, you had to go there. If you were Italian, you had to go there. And that's about the extent of our community. Our little international community had that many different families there. But there was only one ice house. And if you know anything about the Mississippi Delta, and I know there's a lady here from the Arkansas Delta, and she can vouch with me that if you're in the Delta anywhere, you burn up, it's hot, you gotta have ice. And at 14 years old, my uncle had not gotten the memo that I was too young to work, so I was in charge of the ice house. I mean, and if you could look for, as far as you could see, trucks of people coming to get ice. And I learned to take that 300 pounds of ice, cut it into 75, 150, 25 pounds, count the money, make sure that nothing went wrong. But most importantly, my uncle left me with a picture that I could own a business. And I said in my lifetime that I don't mind working for others, but I want to work for myself. And I want to hire others. I owe it to my uncle to do that, because it was his character that really helped me to understand his ethical way of doing business at a time when this man should have been called Mr. Mormon, and people would simply call him Boy. And he would look at me and he said, "That's okay. I'm on my way to First National Bank." And that's all he would say. And I understood that, because he couldn't, one man couldn't change the world, but he said, "I'm on my way to First National Bank." And I remembered those lessons. The character of my uncle was very important. The character of my first boss outside of the family, Mrs. J.B. Knights. She owned a sewing shop in Glen Allen, Mississippi, but she also had a fig orchard. And I was hired to rake fig leaves. And raking fig leaves is a very hard job, because fig leaves are not designed to move at your command. They have suction cups built into them, and they hang right there. But I remember the first day I went to work for Mrs. Knights. It was around 11:30. I'd gotten hungry. But my great aunt had said, "You can eat when you come home." And that was her answer for everything. When I would want to, go to school, didn't have lunch money, trying to miss a day out of school, she got in my face and she just said, "Listen." But she kind of put some salty words with it in the weekdays. But on Sunday, no salty words. But during the weekdays, salty words. And she said, "No, you get on that blank bus, because nobody starves in a day." And so her idea was you could eat at home. But, I remember that, because if I had missed one day with her permission, and that one day turned into a week, and that week turned into a month, and that month turned into a grade lesser, not going forward but going backwards, I wouldn't be your guest today. She told me to get on the bus. and I've been on the bus all of my life. So when I went to work for Mrs. Knight, she said, you can eat when you come home. But this is what good character does. This is ethical behavior at its best. Mrs. Knight knew the rules of legal segregation. We all knew how to live in that world. Your life depended upon it. Your social standing depended upon it. For black people, your life depended upon it. For white people, their social standing depended upon it, if they would break those rules. So the first thing she said, come on, let's go and eat lunch. Let us go and eat lunch. That's us. Well, you don't use us unless your character and ethical behavior is dictating something that is new. So I turned to go to the kitchen because that is where we would go, not through a white person's front door. She said, no, come on, follow me. And so we went into her house. We sat at her dining room table, baked chicken, lima beans, sweet milk. That's the meal. I've never forgotten it. And she asked me, she said, what are you reading? And I told her the books that I was reading, and she just went into what I call a Mississippi hissy fit. Oh, you can't read those books. No, you have to read books from the library. I said, Mrs. Knight, I can't go to the library. So dead silence fell over the room. The next week I came back to work, and sitting by my plate at her dining room table was a stack of books. The books that you read when your life matters. Books that you read when you're going somewhere. Books that you read when your future is important. Books that you read when you have a sense of who you can become. Not just one set of books, but for the years that I worked, the Glen Allen Library, they would not let me in. Through Mrs. Knight's, these books were brought into my life. Yes, I lived in a culture of exclusion. Cultures of exclusion exist today. But people like us, we have the ability to open the doors. We have the ability to do what needs to be done to make sure that community is always there. Because in a workplace where community abounds, I can guarantee you that productivity is better. In a place where community abounds, creativity, innovative thoughts and ideas run freely. But when we do not accept or take advantage of the incredible opportunities that we have to make a difference, then we leave a lot on the table that should not be left. To the generations of promise, remember to be gentle with yourself and others. We are all children of chance, and none can say why some fields will blossom while others lay brown beneath the August sun. Care for those around you. Look past your differences. Why? Because their dreams are no less than yours. That, to me, is the great design of life. And when I think of character and when I think of ethical behavior, I simply think of men and women making a decision to build good community. Because at the end of the day, it is the good community that you build, the culture within your workplace, that will make a difference. A place that you enjoy coming to, a place that you enjoy being productive, a place that you enjoy, literally enjoy, the ideas of the diversity of what you can learn and what you can do. When I went to Australia for the first time to the Charles Sturt University to lecture on innovation and entrepreneurship, it was absolutely amazing. Amazing that I could leave Glen Allen, get to Oklahoma, and now in Australia. But I always go back that my grandpa was the first person to open the front door and said, who wants to go to Greenville? It's only 26 miles away, but that meant everything in the world to me. It doesn't take building or rebuilding the Golden Gate Bridge or the pyramids of Africa or the Eiffel Tower in Paris to make a difference in the life of a person. It can be as simply as opening the screen door and giving someone a different view of what is possible. The fourth one, intentional and protracted. Good character is not formed in a week or a month. It is created little by little, day by day. Protracted and patient effort is needed to develop good character. Good character is not a joke. It's a lifelong journey. And every day we have the opportunity to travel that road. The fifth one is an international conversation. I work with people all over the world, and this is the conversation. How do we become our better selves? No matter how that world might look, the United Nations, whether it look like refugee camps around the world, character is key to trust. And people are looking for trust. And trust does not come as something we can purchase or download, but trust is what we make as communities being built. Trust emerges out of that incredible process, and it makes all the difference in the world. The sixth one, and my last point, is this. The next generation is our responsibility. This has nothing to do with your work. It just has all to do with your life. The next generation is indeed our responsibility. There they are, girls and boys from all across the country, but our character matters because they're looking at us. They're asking questions. They're seeing what we do, how we do, and how we relate to others. The next generation, they are looking at us, and they are asking questions. What will you do? How do I do this? How do I accomplish this? It's not just enough to live on the planet and take up space. 6 billion of us are here, and some of our paths will never, ever cross. But I can assure you that the impact that you have, the impact that is embedded within each human being, is this ability to reach beyond your front porch and let your goodness soar on the wings of the wind. You have no idea where it will take you, who they will become as a result of your touch. What do you want the little kids to see? Because these will be the young men and women that will take our places. They will be seated here 20 years from now. Not us, but they will. How do we want them to respond in a world of advancing technology that is creating more things than we ever could have imagined? But there's one thing that we can imagine: our ability to build community and make a difference in the lives of young people. Being, that's what they are. They're just being now. But being starts early. And we have a responsibility to give them the lift of life that is transformative and forever changeable. It's been my pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.